Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel, Hydra's Ultimate Weapon. Chapter 21. If Loki saw this scene, you will definitely cheer with great surprise and excitement. Reminiscing about the battle in New York, he looked like this when Hulk grabbed one of his legs and was then repeatedly thrown to the ground like a dead dog. He was even ridiculed, as this worthy of being called a god. Single quote. And now, Captain Steve used his own personal experience to personally feel how painful and ashamed Loki was. Even worse, because after Loki experienced Hulk's love beating, although he looked very miserable, he still had a breath and a life. Asgard. No, the blood of the frost giants is quite powerful. Although Loki looks thin and weak, his ability to resist a blow is not inferior to that of a barbarian like Thor. Similarly, the power Hulk exerted at that time was completely inferior to Rorschach. This led to Captain Steve's fate, which was obviously many times worse than Loki's. After being kicked and beaten more than 10 times, Steve was obviously breathing more out than in. Blood was pouring out of his nose, eardrums and mouth. His eyes seemed to be open, and it could be seen from the corners of his eyes that he had the eyeballs that are bloodshot. Captain Steve's condition is already extremely miserable. After just a sudden contact with Rorschach, and not even a few blows, Captain Steve was already beaten to such a state of decline, which shows how huge the strength gap between the two warring parties is. If the Avengers truly unite, just like what the captain said, together we are invincible. Single quote. This statement may have a certain degree of truth. But when it was actually implemented, it turned out to be a mess and extremely ugly. What if Thor, Captain Steve, and the most important main force, the Hulk, worked together to fight Rorschach, with the help of other superheroes? A confrontational situation might not be possible. Of course it's still dangerous, like walking a tightrope. All it takes for Rorschach to catch one omission is to cause the entire situation to collapse. But no matter what, Captain Steve would never end up like this. The Hulk didn't cooperate, and Thor took the lead to fight alone. They have already laid the seeds for this epic battle. As Rorschach continues to attack, Captain Steve's injuries will truly change from serious to life-threatening. Hawkeye, who was hiding in the dark, finally couldn't bear it any longer. One after another, 2 rounds of 3 arrows were fired, adding up to a total of 6 arrows, shooting at Rorschach. Rorschach had planned to ignore it. With his physical defense, he could easily withstand this level of damage. But Hawkeye is indeed Hawkeye. These 6 arrows were all aimed at Rorschach's weak points. The 2 arrows were aimed at the eyes. The other 2 were aimed at the heart and neck area. The last 2 were aimed at the wrist. Rorschach initially judged that the last 2 arrows should be aimed at the tendons of his hands, with the purpose of injuring his hands and reducing his combat effectiveness. Just a few other arrows. But one has to guard against arrows aimed at both eyes. The weakness in ordinary people's perception is not the same thing as Rorschach's physical weakness. But as long as we still rely on vision to observe all kinds of living and dead things, the eyes will still be an extremely important part of the body for Rorschach. Because it is important, it is a weakness. Rorschach was not sure whether his double eyelids could withstand these 2 arrows from Hawkeye. He chose not to take any chances. But he didn't choose to dodge. Rather, with one hand, he grabbed the semi-conscious Captain Steve in front of him, firmly protecting his surroundings. Human shields have been around since ancient times and are still popular today, not because of anything else but because this trick is so easy to use. Okay. Right, that is it. Let those high-sounding superheroes know that they are very insidious and vicious, then you must do more ruthlessly than them. Only by doing this will those superheroes who claim to be righteous will know how to be afraid and understand that they are also made of flesh and blood, and how ridiculous their actions are. Hydra base, in the command room. After seeing Rorschach's operation in response to Hawkeye's cold arrow, Baron Strucker was immediately overjoyed and applauded. It was all an upright battle. Why did those Avengers do what they did? Are they all just? Even if they, especially S.H.I.E.L.D.'s dirty tricks, can be whitened as just acts. Baron Strucker keeps all this in mind, but he can't make it public. In this life, no one would believe him if he told it. But now, after seeing Rorschach's operation, Baron Strucker felt joy in his heart. His mood became more and more excited. A pair of eyes were also completely nailed. On Rorschach, the emotion in his eyes is beyond mention how satisfying it is. It is indeed the ultimate weapon that he has spent his whole life working on and even put everything into it. This is definitely the product of the 21st century. A supreme masterpiece. It was made by him, Baron Strucker. In the future, even if he is gone and dead, as long as there are still people who admire and fear the threat and terror of this ultimate weapon, then there will definitely be people who think of him. Even if you want to remove his skin and bones and cut him into thousands of pieces. But can you say that this doesn't remind you of him? Black and red are also red. Even if they are stink for thousands of years, they will be passed down to all generations. He, Straker, the great Straker Lord Track, Baron. His name will be passed down forever, even if there will be countless infamy. But, who can say that there must be no like-minded people like him? You like to shoot cold arrows in the back, right? Ah, it's your own fault, taste the bitter fruit for yourself. Rorschach stood behind Steve. Taking advantage of his free time, he scanned the direction of the arrow, but he only saw a wilderness and no trace of Hawkeye. Steve, Thor and others have all become defeated by Rorschach in hand-to-hand combat. No matter how strong Hawkeye's fighting ability is, it is impossible for him to jump out and challenge Rorschach one-on-one. So the only thing he can do is to shoot cold arrows from a distance. To carry out strategic support. Unexpectedly, the consequences of the cold arrow did not harm Rorschach in the end, but threatened his own people first. He hid in the dark, and the camouflage uniform he wore blended in with the surrounding environment. See Rorschach make when Captain Steve was turned into a human shield, his eyes suddenly widened, and he felt extremely regretful. But at this time, if he was asked to stop those 6 arrows, even if his archery skills could pierce through them, he would never be able to do so. Maybe we can do it. Time doesn't allow. Just as these 6 cold arrows are about to pass through the layers of barriers, whistling and mixed with the howling of the wind, they are about to plunge into Steve's body. A figure is wrapped in endless thunder, rushing out from the side. The thunder snake lightning exploded all over his body, destroying all the cold arrows and falling to the ground. After the initial anger and grief, Thor, the god of thunder, finally gathered his spirits and regrouped, and stood in front of Rorschach again. But the swelling on his face had not subsided, so he felt an indescribable sense of joy as he faced Rorschach face to face. Hydra, I will make you pay with your life. Thor roared loudly at Rorschach. To outsiders, Mjolnir is a hammer, an artifact. But to Thor, he is nothing more than a close friend and a true, beloved. Rorschach crushed Saul's girlfriend to pieces. How could he not fight to the death? But for Saul, who looked indignant, Rorschach was noncommittal and just said lightly, "Only weak people keep talking nonsense, because they can't do anything." Hearing Rorschach mocking him like this, as the Prince of Asgard and recognized by the vast majority of Asgardians as the next God King, Thor looks like a brute force, despite his usual cheerfulness and lack of formality. But in his heart, he also had a sense of pride and dignity. Now being trampled and ridiculed by Rorschach. In addition, Mjolnir was crushed before his eyes. Thor completely exploded. With unprecedented anger, he launched a death charge towards Rorschach. Not to mention, Cheng Yaojin still has 3 axes. When the famous Thor was extremely angry, he really stood up. In the head-on conflict with Luo Sha, he was not repulsed, but actually fought. Together. Everyone knows that this is the explosion state in a deadly battle and cannot be sustained for a long time. But compared with the previous performance, it is still one day and one place. Rorschach was knocked back by Thor's strange power and retreated one after another. He also had to throw the Captain Steve heavily to the ground to free his hands so that he could confront Thor head-on. 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. Rorschach's situation just now was that he was alone and unable to cope with Thor's desperate attack with 1 hand. Only. I'm curious, how long can you maintain this offensive? Rorschach spoke softly, and while strolling in the courtyard, he dodged another attack launched by Thor. Rorschach was not stupid. Even if he could confront Thor head-on, Rorschach did not let himself suffer more harm in vain. The reason is very simple. Behind Thor, there is S.H.I.E.L.D. in America. If he is really desperate, the person who can even bring Asgard is the god King Odin, who has shocked even the purple sweet potato for a long time. But there is nothing behind Rorschach. Others thought that there was at least Hydra behind him. However, his family knew about his family affairs. Rorschach was very sure that except for the twins who were allies, he was nothing else. Therefore, Rorschach chose to avoid being injured as much as possible. Even if his self-healing ability is extremely strong, if he can't test this ability, it's better not to test it. The most important thing is, with Thor's explosion, how long can he maintain the fight? Rorschach looked at Thor's every move like a little chicken trying to flap its wings, his eyes full of sarcasm. You should be glad that you are the son of that God King, and you are also your biological son. Just like your brother always hated. So, I will destroy you, but I won't kill you. While speaking, Rorschach crossed over Steve's body, and then gave the unfortunate captain another hard kick. He directly let him sink deeply into the ground, and used his body to measure a hole on the ground. Pothole. But others are not so lucky, His Highness the Prince of Asgard. Rorschach's faint voice reached Thor's ears, making him even more angry and crazy. The status I have today is all earned by taking the lead and charging into battle every time. Thor swung his fist, mixed with countless thunderous roars. While attacking, he roared loudly. All this has nothing to do with whose son I am. It's what I earned through my heroic efforts. Hydra's fool. I will tear you apart with my own hands and let you know that I still have the name of God of War in Asgard. I will do all this with my own hands, and it has nothing to do with other people in Asgard. Thor was easily broken by what Rorschach said. This was partly due to the pain point, but more importantly, it was probably because Loki was involved. But Rorschach didn't care about that. His eyes, the cunningness of a successful plot flashed through his eyes were extremely deep, and he expressed faintly. Oh, yeah, hope so. If it really depends on these few words, the other gods of Asgard will not be involved, then the credit of these few words cannot be measured in money. A skid behind Thor is not a big deal. In Rorschach's view, most Asgardians are drunkards. However, the others are drunkards. There is no way to be sure whether the leader of the God King, who is powerful in the 9 realms and famous in the universe, is a drunkard. Luo Shah. Shah knew a lot of film and television information, but he had never seen what level of power the God King had when he personally took action. He only knew, as soon as the God King fell, Zephynpidion led his army to Asgard. Before that, there was no movement. After thinking about this, Rorschach couldn't help but soften her eyes when looking at Saul. Well, I'll be gentler later and I won't break one of your legs. Tony, think of a way. Thor can't last long. When the anger in his heart dissipates, he will be defeated instantly. Hawkeye was hiding in the dark, observing the battlefield situation, and couldn't help but talk loudly into the communicator. There was no way he couldn't help. In addition to the incident with Lang Jian before, he didn't even dare to help now. Rorschach with one-hand operation, he easily caught him. So Hawkeye had no choice but to ask for help from Tony Stark. Tony's voice came from the communicator. You and Natasha must not go out. That guy is ridiculously strong and a complete monster. You and Natasha are at risk of being killed instantly with one move. Hawkeye couldn't help but rolled his eyes. I know. The question is how to deal with this guy. Captain Steve has to be rescued, he can't last long. Tony replied. I know. Don't worry. I've activated a big treasure that, if not victory, can buy us time. By the way, where's Natasha? Eagle Eye replied. Off to chase the Hulk. Why did Hulk disobey orders and suddenly leave the battlefield? If he was still here, the situation would be much better if he and Saul were together. Natasha was worried about him and chased after him. Tony was also very troubled. I don't know either. We can only wait until this battle is over to find out more, if we are still alive. Tony is also full of questions and has no way to ask. They have a good relationship with Dr. Banner. But what does Bruce Banner have to do with me, the Hulk? In the Avengers, except for Natasha, everyone else has a tepid relationship with the Hulk. Because of this, when it was clear that something had happened to Hulk, Natasha hurriedly chased after her, fearing that her comrade would end up leaving without saying goodbye. No one knows what Hulk is thinking. What gift have you prepared for that Hydra? Can you really deal with him? Seeing that Tony was also confused, he didn't know much more than him. Hawkeye didn't dwell on the Hulk thing, but turned to ask another question. Tony's answer was very simple. I have no idea. I originally prepared that thing to use against the Hulk. As a result, now that Hulk has escaped, I have used it on this guy. I don't know how effective it will be. Hawkeye was speechless when he heard this. He thought of Hulk. Tony Stark, Iron Man, a good comrade who had fought side by side, even prepared a gift to deal with Hulk. The distrust is obvious. So, Hulk may have already shown signs of distrusting them, but they were immersed in the glory of the past and did not realize it. At this time Tony spoke again. Whether it can deal with that Hydra, I don't know, but I know this gift can help us share the pressure. Let's rescue Steve. There was no time to waste in hesitation. Jarvis had scanned it remotely, and Steve was seriously injured. At the moment, it was all about his physical fitness, but if he was continued to be attacked by the Hydra, he might be in trouble. As soon as the captain came up, Hawkeye didn't have the time to think about Hulk anymore. He quickly asked, "Is there anything I can do to help?" "You give Hulk." "No, it was a gift for that Hydra, and what was its name?" Tony replied on the communicator. "Just look at the right moment and shoot from a distance to harass, but be sure to remember not to reveal your traces. Once traces are revealed, it will be fatal with the mobility shown by this Hydra. As for the name of that gift, I called it the Hulkbuster armor before. As for what it should be called now, I don't know." "Your offensive slows down," Rorschach commented in a faint voice. In the time it took for Iron Man and Hawkeye to communicate urgently and chat for a few words, the situation on the battlefield had already reached a very critical point. After all, the explosive Thor did not turn this. His bravery and courage continued to be maintained. After 3 axes, under the gaze of Rorschach, his movements slowed down significantly. Facts have proved that ordinary people can be brave for a moment, but this moment of bravery cannot last long. "Don't underestimate me, Hydra." Thor roared angrily and attacked again. But Rorschach had been observing for a long time and had figured out Thor's attack pattern. His eyes flashed, but his body was already violently suppressing him, instead of dodging as before. "My name is not Hydra, I have my own name. For the rest of your life, my name may be deeply imprinted in your mind, and you won't be able to forget it even if you want to. Remember, my name is Rorschach." While responding to Thor, Rorschach had already launched an attack. When Thor had just finished attacking with his front foot and had no strength left, Rorschach had already aimed at the gap and rushed to Thor's side in a flash. A pair of iron hands clamped down on Thor's left arm unshakably. The next moment, Rorschach clasped his hands and folded them in the middle. "Ah!" The god of thunder, Thor, screamed out in pain and stepped back with his arms hanging down. His injured left arm, under Rorschach's passionate attack, had turned into half a twist, and the injury was extremely serious. Rorschach, just as he was preparing to pursue the victory, he removed one of Thor's legs, causing him to completely lose the courage to fight against him. However, he suddenly noticed something and suddenly raised his head. He saw a shooting star in the sky. He was falling at a high speed. The speed could be said to be extremely fast. He was clearly planning to smash a pit of tens of meters deep into this place. Luo Sha narrowed his eyes slightly. There was a vague sense of déjà vu in his mind. But just a little. Not much. I vaguely remember that it seems to be something Tony Stark created. But there is no highlight performance. Rorschach muttered and stepped back 20 meters. He could reach this distance in the blink of an eye. Even if Tony Stark really wanted to pull something off, he couldn't escape from his grasp. He watched the meteors falling from the sky. Will smash a deep hole on the ground like an asteroid. In particular, in addition to Rorschach, there are also Thor with a broken arm and Captain Steve who has been severely injured. Rorschach, on the other hand, I want to see if this Iron Man is planning to have 2 superheroes buried with him in order to destroy him. However, Rorschach has not yet waited for feedback from Tony Stark. Baron Strucker had already stepped in and joined the battle. After taking aim, 2 large yield long-range missiles were launched from the Hydra base, aiming directly at the meteors falling rapidly in the sky. Snort. Do you really think this is your backyard? You can come here when you want, airdrop when you want. Then you have to ask me if I can answer it first. In the command room of the Hydra base, Baron Strucker snorted coldly and made his own response. No matter what other people thought, the 2 missiles were launched straight away and hit the target without hesitation. Hulkbuster armor. Rorschach, Hydra, still don't admit that you are a Hydra. Look, even this secret base of Hydra is helping you. Not to mention the long-range firepower, the missiles are now ready. Thor's intact right hand was holding his left hand that was badly injured and twisted. Seeing the Hydra base launching missiles, he gritted his teeth to hold back the pain and asked loudly. But Rorschach was too lazy to pay attention to him. He was defeated and barked, "Why should you care?" He raised his head, looked at the sky, and saw with his own eyes what would happen if the Hulkbuster armor collided head-on with two high-yield missiles. Boom! A violent explosion came from the sky, followed by a grand fireworks show, which was extremely bright. Looking at the momentum, it was really horrifying. With such intensity of collision, such intensity of explosion, there is a high probability that both parties will go together. Hell! But Rorschach's eyes were sharp, and he quickly saw a huge thing in the smoke that covered his sight. It broke through the endless smoke and hit the ground with an unshakable attitude. At this time, as the distance got closer, it was vaguely visible. It was a giant machine structure with a shell painted in gold and red. Its shape was like a pointed rocket. But as it gradually approached the ground, the pointed rocket, the assembly and transformation began in midair. From a fluid dynamic pointed rocket, it transformed and reorganized into a huge gold-red two-color robot. It looked very burly and a little honest. Rorschach had sharp eyes and a vague sense of humor. It can be seen that there is a gap in the chest of this giant robot, which can just fit an object of normal human size into it. Presumably, that is the gap that Iron Man has prepared for himself in advance. When Iron Man wearing Mark's suit merges into how the Hulkbuster armor, after the two are combined into one, is the real complete Hulkbuster armor. As for now, Tony Stark would definitely not dare to blend in, because it would directly become Rorschach's target and he would not be able to escape. Now this giant robot should be controlled remotely by Jarvis to start its actions. After the Hulkbuster armor deformed and reorganized in midair, it had transformed into a large robot. With the help of the reverse thrust of the flames sprayed from its tail, it landed smoothly and easily. The expected scene of Mars hitting the Earth was not staged, killing Thor or Steve and others on the spot. Tony Stark had obviously anticipated this scene, so he was not worried about accidentally injuring the Avengers. Rorschach took a closer look and saw that the gold and red shell of the Hulkbuster armor also had a lot of damage and carbonized parts due to explosions, but overall it was harmless. The two missiles ordered to be launched by Baron Strucker did not cause much damage to it. It seems that Hydra's technological level is indeed far behind Tony Stark's. Of course, it may just be that this base is relatively poor. After all, as the person in charge of the base, Strack has been somewhat neglectful in recent years. Rorschach certainly knew that the reason why Baron Strucker was not doing his job properly was because he devoted all his research team to the ultimate weapon. Rorschach didn't even have a word of thank you in his heart. He just wanted to chop Straker into pieces 100 times. 100 times. Next, let me be your opponent. Jarvis's mechanical voice came from the head of the Hulkbuster armor. Jarvis immediately intervened in the inner core of the armor, keeping all its operations in mind. He then controlled the armor to move forward. Huge the tonnage stepped on the ground, as if a hill began to move, and launched an attack on Rorschach. But with this look, there was no way to scare Rorschach in the slightest. Where is your master? Why didn't he come out and instead sent you out to die? Or, you can't die, so you can appear in front of me unscrupulously. Rorschach jumped up and kicked hard on the shell armor of the Hulkbuster armor, directly kicking the big and hard piece of iron away. This kick directly broke the Hulkbuster armor defense, revealing various mechanical lines inside. In Rorschach's eyes, these mechanical lines are no less than the blood vessels of ordinary people. Jarvis's reaction ability is extremely fast. He did not reveal any information to Rorschach, but instead from Rorschach's few words, some intelligence information was determined. Mr. Rorschach, you seem to know me and my master Mr. Tony Stark very well. Everyone knows Iron Man Tony Stark. They know that this superhero is a playboy and a super rich man with billions of assets in his hands. But as for Tony Stark secretly creating an artificial intelligence, the name of the artificial intelligence is still Jarvis. Only a few other Avengers are more clear or certain about this matter. Let alone the outside world. These are top secret files in S.H.I.E.L.D. and belong to Nick Fury. Ray's encapsulation secret was only kept in his head. All S.H.I.E.L.D. agents knew that Tony Stark liked to attack S.H.I.E.L.D.'s firewall, but they all thought that Tony Stark did it himself. Unexpectedly, depending on shield, the firewall behind the firewall is an artificial intelligence, which is a godlike existence on the internet. When Rorschach heard this, he immediately fell silent and did not speak. It is too difficult to pry out information from Jarvis. This guy operates completely according to the logic of the most rational and optimal solution. He can think of countless options and answers in an instant, and then choose the decision that is most beneficial to him. In the face of humans, Rorschach can attack with words, suppress intelligence, and finally intimidate with force, thereby forming a favorable situation for himself. But faced with absolute rationality, and not afraid of life and death, Jarvis, then we can only rely on the most unpretentious absolute power to completely suppress it, and then win the battle. Fortunately, Rorschach's fists are very hard. After smashing the outer armor of the giant robot, he stretched his hands forward and directly grabbed the mechanical lines. Regardless of the effect, it would definitely be useful for the Hulkbuster armor anyway. As long as it is useful to the enemy, then destroy it. Rorschach grabbed and pulled and tore off all these mechanical lines and pipes. In an instant, various black, purple, and blue liquids splashed out. There are organic oils and lubricants among them, but Rorschach doesn't know what the other liquids are. Notwithstanding the severe damage to the chest area, a large amount of white smoke began to emit from the inside of the Hulkbuster armor, as if it was about to explode. No, it's really going to explode. Rorschach moved his nose and sniffed hard. He really smelled a lot of burnt smell. The sparks inside the Hulkbuster armor also began to splash hard, plus various liquids seeping out of the chest area. There is a collection of explosion signs, and all the elements come alive together. Rorschach frowned and was not immediately deterred. He opened his bow left and right again, and struck another heavy blow to destroy the inside of the Hulkbuster armor. This is really a hornet's nest. For a moment, a large number of sparks burst out, followed by thick smoke. The head of the Hulkbuster armor also began to chirp, as if it was a life-threatening reminder of the last 10 seconds before the base exploded. The Hulkbuster armor created by Tony Stark is so fragile when used. Rorschach had a doubt in his heart. But he didn't dare to be careless. There are various signs that the Hulkbuster armor is about to explode. This is a giant robot that 2 missiles have no effect on. Its quality and destructive power are both high. But perhaps it just met an unsuitable opponent, and the end result was such a miserable one. It withstood the frontal explosion of 2 missiles, but when it exploded, Rorschach didn't know how powerful the explosion would be. To be cautious, Rorschach strategically moved 100 meters to the rear. This distance was enough for Rorschach. As long as he was not in the center of the explosion, Rorschach would not let go of the aftermath of the explosion at all. In his eyes, as long as he can avoid the most frontal and direct explosion impact, then Rorschach believes that he can keep himself intact in subsequent explosions and maintain his peak combat effectiveness. His enemies are not just the Avengers. More and more white smoke leaked from the Hulkbuster armor, covering the surrounding ground with a layer of smoke. It was scary to watch. The rapid alarm sound became more and more urgent and intense, making those who listened to it feel flustered and irritable. But Luo Sha's brows were already furrowed. The Hulkbuster armor's explosion warning has been maintained for some time. For the first 10 seconds, this is what it looked like. Another 10 seconds passed, and it still looked like this. It's just that more white smoke leaked out, and the piercing alarm bell became more urgent. It seemed like there would be a huge explosion at any moment in the next second. But this explosion, is the delay too long? How do you feel? Do you mean to delay time? Rorschach murmured, and was a little undecided for a moment. Even if Hulk is excluded, there are still 5 members of the original 6-person Avengers team, and all of them are the top figures in the world. What were they thinking? It was somewhat difficult for Rorschach to guess the intentions of the 5 of them alone. After waiting for another 5 seconds, the Hulkbuster armor still did not detonate. Just the white smoke and the alarm bell. Super doubled again. This sight of thunder and no rain completely made Rorschach decide not to wait any longer. He dodged and rushed forward to the center of the battlefield, lifting the entire Hulkbuster armor in the center of the thick fog. He stood up, and then ignored his crazy alarm sound, forcibly split it in 2 and tore it in half. Then he cut it into pieces again. At this moment, the alarm bell of the Hulkbuster armor finally stopped. It fell down, and it did not explode either. It was just that the white smoke inside the Hulkbuster armor was leaking more and more, covering an area of several square kilometers. Even Rorschach's sight was extremely seriously affected. Impact. At an altitude of 3,000 meters, several kilometers away from the center of the battlefield. Iron Man's figure was hidden among the clouds, completely hiding his figure, and at the same time, he speeded away from the battlefield calmly. It's just that the famous superhero's posture at this time is somewhat unsightly. Because he was holding Thor in his left hand, his most flexible and powerful right hand was holding Captain Steve, who was seriously injured and unconscious, in his arms. Even behind him, Hawkeye was holding him around his neck and carrying him on his back. The four famous superheroes used the power of their steel suits to escape from the battlefield. What a shame! What a shame! One of Thor's hands was twisted into a twist, but the remaining arm is still intact. With his strength, he can firmly control his body shape with one hand. It cannot be said that from these 3,000 meters high in the sky, he accidentally fell to his death. Saul rambled on, his face looking very ugly. I never thought that one day I would end up in such an ugly and humiliating situation. It's very reasonable to retreat when you can't win on the battlefield. Even Odin, the famous god king in the universe, has his moments when he is weak and when he is defeated and runs away. When Thor encounters an invincible enemy, he chooses strategic transfer as a very reasonable decision. But Thor never thought that his escape posture would be so ugly. He glanced at Steve on the other shoulder, and when he turned around, he saw Hawkeye. There isn't much free space on the steel suit. Thor could completely feel that his arms, thighs and calves were in contact with several other comrades. The smell of blood and sweat was clearly audible. That is to say, this is an altitude of 3,000 meters, and the ventilation conditions cannot be better than this. If he were squeezed into a small room, Thor felt like he would go crazy. He is now the splendid prince of Asgard, the unofficial next god king, and he still pays attention to his image on weekdays. Instead of the slovenly fat house Thor in the future, there is only 2 or 3 big cats and kittens left in the Asked King of Survivors. Tony couldn't help but roll his eyes when he heard this. His current situation can be described as a big man. He was once the richest man. He didn't say anything, but you, who has been the prince for who knows how many years, don't dislike it. At least, we escaped. Tony finally couldn't hold it in and said angrily. We have no information about that guy at all, and we have no idea where that guy named Rorschach came from. Is there a second Rorschach in Hydra? None of us know this. If we continue to fight, the situation will be too unfavorable for us. Moreover, looking at Steve's situation, we can't continue the fight. If we can escape smoothly without causing more casualties, it is still acceptable. Thor looked at Steve, who was seriously injured and unconscious. The latter's breath was very weak. But the super soldier serum was still working. Steve's breath had become much more stable. It was not that he had more air coming out and less air coming in before. If this continues, Steve will really be doomed. Then Thor looked at his arm that was twisted by Ning Chang, and immediately fell silent, without any words of complaint. If the fight continues, I'm afraid not everyone can join in. Not even enough. Tony then said. After I judged that the situation was not good for us, I immediately took countermeasures. One of the countermeasures is to let Jarvis do tricks on the Hulkbuster armor in advance, no matter who is still thinking rationally. Then when they encounter the Hulkbuster armor that emits smoke and sounds an alarm, plus other things characteristics, everyone will definitely believe that the armor is going to explode. Taking advantage of this hard-earned breathing time, I will use the high-speed mobility of the steel suit to quickly take you away from the battlefield. Only in this way can you be out of danger and escape smoothly. Speaking of this, Tony Stark frowned and changed the topic. Although I don't know anything about the Hydra named Rorschach. But after this battle, I have some preliminary judgments about him. At least, I have identified his 2 fatal weaknesses. Saul asked excitedly after hearing this. 2. What weakness? Tony replied. The first fatal weakness is that he can't fly. Or to be precise, it means that he lacks enough threatening attack methods in the air. So after using the Hulkbuster armor to gain some breathing time, I took you to escape immediately. However, I did not choose to fly close to the ground, but directly took off. The higher we fly, the safer we are. Saul looked down at the ground. All he saw were small black dots the size of ants. He couldn't help but nodded. This is the reason. What about the other fatal weakness? As for this second weakness. Speaking of this, Tony Stark also showed an expression of uncertainty. He hesitated before speaking. I found that this Hydra seemed to be very precious about his life. Saul frowned when he heard this. Cherish your life. He held me and Steve down on the head and gave us a beating. I didn't see how he spared his life. Tony shook his head and explained. It's not this life-saving method. He is very scary in battle. You are obsessed with the government and have misjudged many things. It is normal to feel this way. But except for the initial contact with him, I have been maintaining anti-aircraft firepower at other times, so I can observe clearly. This Rorschach seems to be very careful to avoid getting hurt. Thor was speechless after hearing this. Only Tony Stark could describe floating in the sky and counting steps in such a fresh and refined way. He was beaten into a pig's head and one of his hands was broken. Steve was even more. Are you seriously injured and dying, and you end up floating in the sky fishing for fish? He retorted angrily. As a warrior, you should avoid injury and ensure your peak combat effectiveness. Isn't this something everyone understands? Tony shook his head heavily and tried his best to retort on this topic. No, the same. There is a huge difference between the two. The situation is very different, especially in this Rorschach. The behavior is even more abnormal. He was a little confused. Obviously there is the Hydra base behind him, so it stands to reason that this is his home field. Even if he is injured, he can easily retreat to the Hydra base to recuperate. There is no need to be so cautious. With the base camp behind them, and the advantage of playing at home, Rorschach was still so cautious when fighting. He simply didn't give them a chance to survive. And it was Tony Stark, the brain of the famous Iron Man, who is known all over the world. Knowledge was easy to use, and he found a way out in such a crisis. But looking back, the various abnormalities displayed by Rorschach were also imprinted in Tony Stark's mind, making him unable to help but think about the reasons. What is the so-called he ran? I said, is there such a possibility? Hawkeye was silent for a long time, and then finally found the opportunity to speak, and asked tentatively. In fact, that Rorschach isn't Hydra. Was he in a dangerous situation of being attacked from both sides or had other potential dangers threatening him, so he took these unreasonable actions? As soon as these words came out, all the Avengers suddenly fell silent, and the atmosphere on the field was a little cold. Tony shook his head and rejected this possibility. No way. If he has a grudge against Hydra, he should join forces with us. If he is controlled by Hydra, then no matter what he is thinking, he is Hydra's humanoid control weapon. Just like the captain's old friend, he is our enemy, right? But no matter what, as time goes by, the advantage will definitely be in our hands. It will not be Hydra that has the home field advantage, but us. Tony's tone became very cold as he spoke. Their collective team-building activity was a complete failure. Rorschach suddenly appeared, stirring up a storm in the sky. But it doesn't matter. Before, only their 6 Avengers can help. Next, it's time for S.H.I.E.L.D. and even NATO to take action. The offensive and defensive forces are different. The 6 Avengers. As if remembering something, Tony hurriedly asked. Where are Natasha and Hulk? Where are they now? Hawkeye shook his head bitterly. The situation was too critical before and I couldn't take care of it so much. After the subsequent straight line liftoff and temporary safety, I immediately contacted Natasha's communicator, but the call never came through. Jarvis also stood up at the right time. After testing, Ms. Natasha's communication and positioning equipment has stayed in place motionless for several minutes. It is basically concluded that the communicator has been damaged and abandoned. We have been unable to proactively contact Ms. Natasha. As soon as these words came out, the whole place fell into silence. Good calculation. I never thought that these superheroes would sneak away with their tails between their legs. Rorschach is in a dense forest environment shrouded in white mist, and his sight is very obscured by the white mist and trees. It has to be said that movies and TV dramas greatly affect people's minds and judgment. Watching movies has seen too many superheroes from all walks of life. The scene of killing special kills and winning all the way to the end. I have never seen the CG of superheroes defeating them. Rorschach also fell into a little misunderstanding. Who said superheroes can't strategically shift? Amos blockbusters have done me a lot of harm. With Rorschach's keen insight, even though there are two unfavorable conditions of dense fog and dense forest around him, he can still learn about the very distant environment, discover the clues, but did not find Steve, who was seriously injured and unconscious, and Thor, who had a broken arm, had disappeared. As for Hawkeye, who retreated at the first touch and never appeared before, there was no trace at all, and he had never been seen. Finally, after a round of exploration to no avail, Rorschach turned his attention to the sky. After much deliberation, I found no clues on the ground, and there were no rivers or lakes around. Then the only possibilities left are go to heaven and escape from the earth. The possibility of escaping is really low. Considering that Iron Man is here, the possibility of flying into the sky is undoubtedly the greatest. Looking up at the sky was covered with clouds and fog, which provided very favorable additional conditions for escape. If everything is cloudless, Rorschach can indeed consider playing the human bomb genre. He can just say, my drill can break through the sky, and then fly into the sky to see if he can take the steel suit with him. Chuangfei. But in this situation, let's forget it. It hurts to be caught. Rorschach muttered softly, his face expressionless, and he actually didn't have much worry in his heart. At the moment, being unable to fly is indeed a weakness for him. After spending so long in the Hydra laboratory, this weakness has not been made up, not because Rorschach does not want to, but because the chief of the laboratory is a waste. But there is no need to worry, Rorschach has already conceived a unique skill of his own in his mind. As long as he is done, he will have control of the air at his fingertips. Those guys greased their feet and ran very fast. But I haven't gained anything. As Rorschach spoke, he turned to look at the dark corner on the side of the dense forest. He seemed to have noticed Rorschach's gaze and saw that he had been discovered. The hiding man no longer covered himself, and openly overturned a tree and walked away, came out. The burly and huge body, especially the green complexion, was the Hulk. When the Avengers and Rorschach faced off before, although the Hulk was present, he did not choose to take action in the end. He left the battlefield. When the other Avengers didn't expect him, he returned to the battlefield again and appeared in front of Rorschach. Hulk looked at Rorschach with a tangled expression at this time. No one knew that he was tangled in his heart. What are you thinking about? Rorschach did not take action against Hulk, but slowly walked to a place 10 meters in front of Hulk, and then opened his hands. Welcome back, my friend. I know you will definitely come to me. Hulk didn't take action before, and he won't take action now. At the same time, Rorschach also somewhat understood the reason why Hulk didn't take action against him. In a nutshell, the root of everything lies in the irradiation of gamma rays on this matter. Both Rorschach and Bruce Banner have been exposed to gamma rays. If Rorschach has an idea, he can also greatly improve his body shape and turn himself into a giant. Others don't know these things. But this commonality cannot be hidden from Hulk. Friend. Hulk looked at Rorschach, couldn't help but take 2 steps forward, and said with difficulty. Yes, you are Hulk's friend. Only, it feels a little strange. Luo. Shaw heard this and said with a smile. Of course it will feel a little strange. After all, this is the real first time we meet. But those are all false. Our experiences are very similar, we are under the same light, and we have the same blood. Rorschach and Hulk's original form, Bruce Banner, are yellow and white. But that was when they were humans. After experiencing gamma rays, in a sense, in other words, they are each other's kindred spirits. It is precisely because of such strong characteristics that even though the other Avengers and Hulk have been comrades who have fought side by side for a long time, Hulk is still unwilling to take action and directly chooses to leave the battlefield. In order to help his comrades, kill the only people in the world who may be. Bruce Banner may do this, but Hulk will never do it. Listening to Rorschach's words, Hulk had a lot of thoughts in his heart. I felt the same. He nodded repeatedly and loudly acknowledged. Yes, friend, my friend. Then he said with some pain. But there are bad guys who don't approve. Banner said you are a bad guy and an enemy. Let me take action against you. Banner is the bad guy. Rorschach took 1 step across the remaining distance, stretched out his hand and held Hulk's arm. The light and invisible power of his thoughts began to flow, instantly calming Hulk down. Seeing that Hulk was comforted, Rorschach then continued, "It's okay. That bad guy has been locked up in a dark room for the time being. He won't bother you anymore." Hulk spoke vaguely, like the Riddler. But Rorschach completely understood the meaning of his words and automatically translated them. There are two wills in the Hulk's body. Although the foundation of everything comes from Bruce Banner, the two are like Bruce Banner's schizophrenia. But the reality is far more complicated than schizophrenia. After being exposed to gamma rays, Bruce Banner was able to transform back and forth from human to Hulk. Most of the time this transformation is uncontrollable, but sometimes, such as when Bruce Banner is dying, or Hulk and Banner reach a subconscious agreement, then the Hulk will appear in the world. But those are rare cases. In most cases, the human body is dominated by Bruce Banner's consciousness. The Hulk's body is controlled by Hulk. Half for each of them, which seems fair. As for Hulk's previous strangeness, it's actually not difficult to guess. It was almost Bruce Banner who said bad things about Rorschach. But Hulk was not moved and still trusted Rorschach very much. After all, from Hulk's perspective, Rorschach is probably his only tribe in the world. Isn't this a deeper relationship than blood relatives? Of course, I can't be careless and think that this way I can tie Hulk to the tank and become a member of the team. Hulk can indeed gain such trust. After all, Hulk never lies and all his emotional changes are shown on his face, but not Bruce Banner. That guy still thinks that he is a normal human being, and you expect him to join Hydra. Hee. When this guy was being chased by General Ross and other America's military forces with heavy firepower, he just wanted to dodge and never had the idea of joining Hydra in his mind. In his eyes, Rorschach's identity was that of a Hydra that could not be elucidated no matter how he explained it. Simply don't explain. Rorschach used the power of thought from the Mind Stone to calm Hulk's emotions and did some tricks at the same time. This little trick can't keep Bruce Banner in a little dark room. But it can still be done by letting Hulk take control of the body for a longer time. In the past, most of the time, Bruce Banner dominated the body control. In the days to come, it is time to change his identity. Rorschach thought so in his heart. With a calm expression on his face, he gently patted the back of Hulk's hand. He wanted to pat Hulk's shoulder, but with the height difference in front of him, you can't jump up and pat Hulk on the shoulder. Hulk looks obviously much better. Bruce Banner has been talking in his heart before, and Hulk wants to refute him, but he is stupid and can't say anything except roaring in his heart. At this moment, after receiving Rorschach's comfort, my heart suddenly became much clearer. Without the annoying Bruce Banner, Hulk is Hulk. Seeing that Hulk's mood had stabilized, Rorschach made other moves. His eyes turning around, he looked at a quiet corner of the dense forest. After watching for a few seconds, Luo Sha didn't say anything, and the person hiding in the forest came out obediently. His slim waist, slender thighs, and chest on the wonderful mountain peak, wearing a black battle suit that extremely highlighted her figure, the Black Widow Natasha stood up obediently from her hiding place. Her extremely beautiful face was still stained with the dirt and dust that had not been wiped off from the battlefield, but it has not diminished in the slightest, but has even more highlighted its heroic charm. Black Widow, Natasha, Luo Sha spoke calmly. Although it was a question, it was in an affirmative tone. How should I deal with you? Natasha was even more helpless when she heard this. She didn't even take out the gun she carried with her at this moment. Because she knew clearly that she was definitely no match for Rorschach. It didn't matter if she had one more pistol or one less pistol. Although she occupied absolute disadvantage, but Natasha was not discouraged and despaired, she just replied calmly. Kill or behead, I'll do as you please, what else can I do? When Luo Sha heard this, a smile appeared on his face. This is the performance of a smart person. In the same way, I hope you will also be a smart person next. Rorschach glanced at Hulk out of the corner of his eye, and saw that his expression was normal, so he was relieved. I just don't know what would happen if Natasha was killed. Based on the Hulk, no, based on the friendship between Bruce Banner and Natasha, will he go crazy on the spot, completely crazy? Of course, Rorschach has no such intention at the moment. A living prisoner is 10,000 times more useful than a dead one. What do smart people do? What do you want me to do next? Hearing Rorschach's words, Natasha frowned immediately. She heard the hidden meaning. Rorschach said coldly. I won't tie you up, nor will I restrict your movements, but I hope you will follow me obediently and don't think too much. Then, see with your own eyes how I destroyed this Hydra base. Destroy this base. After hearing Rorschach's words, Black Widow Natasha was obviously a little confused at first. But she was very smart, and her brain worked very fast, and she quickly figured out one thing. Are you not Hydra? Luo. Shaw sneered. I have never said that I am a member of Hydra, there is a lot of bad blood between me and Hydra. Hearing this, Black Widow Natasha almost vomited 3 liters of blood. She couldn't help but said, our goal is also to destroy this Hydra base. We made a mistake. Instead of fighting each other, we should make things clear from the beginning and then point our blades at Hydra. From Natasha's perspective, isn't this a farce that flooded the Dragon King Temple? But she didn't believe Rorschach's words easily. Does she have a huge grudge against Hydra? It depends on the actual operation later. You can't just say what Rorschach said. Rorschach laughed silently, but did not explain too much. Just let Natasha fantasize about it. If you use this, the tone of a Black Widow conveyed wrong information, which was also extremely beneficial to Rorschach. After all, Rorschach never told them that it was true that he had a grudge against Hydra, but he had a grudge against America. There was even a blood feud between them. While Natasha was in a mess, Rorschach led the two of them to the front of the quaint castle. The base of Hydra was hidden under the castle. At this moment, the external guards had been cleared them all. After Natasha arrived near the gate, she could still see a broken giant petri dish, with unimaginably thick glass shards shattered everywhere. There were also several corpses of researchers in white coats around. In front of the base gate, the laboratory chief who died at the gate was even more conspicuous. Some special decorations on the chief's body also represented his extraordinary status and extremely high authority within Hydra. Looking at this tragic scene, especially this one, the scene of experimental subject escaping, can be imagined by just thinking about it. Natasha looked at everything at the scene and constructed the scene in her mind, and she almost came up with what happened not long ago. The truth. She glanced at Rorschach, especially because the latter's clothes were obviously taken off and put on randomly, so they didn't fit well, but they revealed a somewhat rough temperament. Inside this giant petri dish, the person who was standing there before was probably Rorschach, which was why he didn't dress properly. No laboratory would put the experimental subject into a petri dish while still dressing it. I couldn't help but trust the authenticity of Luo Shaw's previous words. At the same time, I began to wonder, what did Tony Stark do in the beginning that ultimately caused the final chaos? At first, Tony claimed that he had been attacked. Then when we arrived, we started fighting Rorschach head-on indiscriminately. Is there any misunderstanding in this, and is there anything that can be undone? Natasha couldn't help but think in her heart. Tony said he was attacked. Could it be that some of his actions were mistaken for offensive actions, and therefore Rorschach counterattacked, ultimately leading to this misunderstanding? Natasha can't help it. She can't explain or think clearly. She and Tony and others have been separated in 2 places, and they can't be contacted at the moment. Without more information, all she can do now is stand. She was thinking wildly here. No, it was more than that. She could also witness with her own eyes how Rorschach destroyed this Hydra base. After seeing the blast-proof door of the base, Hulk slapped his chest angrily, roared and rushed straight into he rushed over. I saw that he hit the base gate with unstoppable momentum. However, Tishan did not directly fly the gate as expected. It was visible to the naked eye that the iron gate had some deformation, but it was not very obvious. He still completed his mission brilliantly and withstood Hulk's fatal collision. Looking at this posture, even if Hulk finally broke through the door, he would have to spend some effort. I just don't know what is behind this door. How many barriers are there? I come. Seeing that Hulk failed to hit the target, Rorschach spoke softly. Hulk was obviously unwilling. Come 2 more times and you'll definitely smash it. Luo. Shaw comforted her softly. Relax and save some strength. There are many Hydras in this base waiting for your arrival. Hulk and Banner had the same opinion on dealing with Hydra. Hulk nodded slightly, approved of Rorschach's decision, and took a few steps back to make room. But Rorschach did not take a run, just moved his wrist. Then he stood 1 meter away from the door, stretched out his hand to make a fist, and then punched out. This punch was unusual in Natasha's eyes, and she felt it looked familiar. It seems to be some variation of Jet-kun. The next moment, there was only a crisp sound, and before much noise was made, the explosion-proof door was punched through by Luo Sha from the center. Then Rorschach moved forward, his left hand turned into a palm and pressed against the outside of the iron door, while his right fist exerted force on the inside of the door. A double pincer attack from one inside and another directly opened the entire door panel. Chapter 31. After opening the outermost explosion-proof iron door. When you enter the passage and take a look, you can see that another door has fallen inside the door. The explosion-proof layer is next to the explosion-proof layer, and the big iron door is connected to the big iron door. The Hydra base is just an entrance, but it is so tightly sealed, which fully demonstrates how easy it is to defend and difficult to attack. Natasha felt a little headache looking at it. This is a typical turtle shell. If these Hydras inside the base have no intention of escaping, but choose to stick to their positions, no one knows how much shield or others will have to pay to bulldoze this base. But this kind of thing becomes extremely simple when it comes to Rorschach. Just leave it to me. Luo Sha glanced twice, his expression was as usual. He just left a word softly, then walked forward and started a new round of breaking in. It was just another layer of iron doors. It can break through the outermost layer. If there is an iron door, then the one inside is not that difficult. At most, it will be twice as thick, allowing Rorschach to spend more effort. But you want to stop him. Stop wishing. Lord Baron, he is coming. He is going to devour the master of this ultimate weapon. After seeing Rorschach's operations on the monitor, everyone in the command room panicked. They couldn't help but panic. According to the base's original plan, it was based on the first anniversary of resisting a large-scale military attack. This is a long-term consideration for war, in short, on protracted war. Even if S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to tear open the loopholes in the base, it will have to break its own teeth. The result? It's so dramatic. The outermost explosion-proof layer was easily torn by Rorschach. That level of explosion-proof layer is prepared to deal with nuclear explosions. Although there are 3 such explosion-proof layers. But Rorschach can do it so easily. The outermost explosion-proof layer was torn, so the 2 inner layers may not be of much use. These people in the command room are more aware of the defense measures of the base, so after seeing Rorschach showing such power, how much they panic and fear are all natural things. Shut up, everyone. You are in a panic, and you don't look like an elite at all. Normally, all of you would have to undergo brutal training. Baron Strucker saw that his men were so miserable, and scolded him with a cold snort. The others fell silent immediately, not daring to speak any more. Baron Strucker turned to look at the big screen again. At this moment, in their panic, during the gap, Rorschach had already torn off the second explosion-proof layer with his hands. This speed and efficiency were simply appalling. When Strack saw this scene, he was also filled with emotion. The bases and fortresses built to cope with large-scale military group operations are already outdated and cannot keep up with the times. After all, it is a measure prepared to deal with ordinary people and thermal weapons. When facing the supernatural power of the ultimate weapon, still too forced. Having said this, Strack changed the topic, and countless praises and pride poured out of his mouth. But he is worthy of being the ultimate weapon created by me. Have such power. The stronger it is, the more it proves that this Baron is extraordinary. The ultimate weapon has such a powerful power. As the builder, Baron Strucker, does he also have to be on the list, and how can he be honored? The Hydra next to him almost burst into tears when he heard Baron Strucker's words. My Lord Baron, this is not the time to be proud. The ultimate weapon you are so proud of is coming to take away you and all of us soon. What kind of good place can Hydra's laboratory be? Where to go? Where did the ultimate weapon escape from? Other Hydras don't need to think about it. They know that it crawled out of hell, and the most terrible thing is that this ultimate weapon crawled out of hell still retains he has his own past memories and has not been brainwashed and assimilated by Hydra. This means that he remembered all the cruel things Hydra had done to him. Baron Strucker didn't pay attention to the anxious subordinates beside him. At this time, he suddenly asked, Gemini, how's it going? Got it. The subordinate was stunned when he heard this, and then expressed some embarrassment. Report back to Lord Baron. Quicksilver ran too fast, time is running out, we haven't caught him yet. When Straker heard this, he sneered. Pressed for time, I think your thoughts are not on this. I was frightened by the fighting outside. Quicksilver can only move in a straight line. He cannot turn flexibly while running at high speed. As long as you use your brains more and do the blockade work in advance, you still can't catch him. Baron Strucker was holding a cane, and he became more and more angry as he spoke. In anger, he hit the subordinate on the head with the cane. An angry look appeared on his face. Are you incompetent? You have directly ruined your last chance of survival. With Straker's wisdom, it is not difficult to see all the abnormalities before. He was very confused. Why would Gemini betray him? Quicksilver and Wanda acted very sincerely in the past, and if they wanted revenge, they had no other choice but to rely on Hydra. But after the unexpected incident with the ultimate weapon, Strack just thought about it and figured out the whole thing. Without him knowing it, Gemini had already colluded with the ultimate weapon. Now the ultimate weapon traps the dragon and ascends to the sky, no longer shackles. With the current situation of the base, there is no way to use the ultimate weapon. But as long as we capture the twin stars and the ultimate weapon, these two hard-won partners, perhaps things will turn around. But Strack never thought that these people under him were such useless people. If it were an open field outside, no one would be able to catch Quicksilver. But here is the inside of the base where all the exits are blocked, and no one from the Gemini has been caught. These subordinates disappointed him so much. The subordinates who stood aside and listened obediently felt aggrieved. The conditions for arresting within the base are favorable to Hydra. But the problem is that time is too tight. Such a short time was only enough for them to further seal off the capture area, but there was still some chance before they could actually capture Quicksilver. They were moving fast enough, but Rorschach moves faster. It seems that Wanda and Quicksilver hold a lot of weight in Ultimate Weapon's heart. The battle with the Avengers was ended in a hurry, and they directly launched a counterattack on the base without even conducting a pursuit operation. Straker narrowed his eyes and suddenly woke up. No, it's not that simple. What occupies a huge proportion in Ultimate Weapon's heart is the Gemini or the Loki's scepter in the hands of Gemini. After Loki's scepter fell into the hands of Hydra, many experiments and research work were carried out. In most cases, they were useless subjects. Based on the situation in front of him, Straker vaguely realized that Loki the scepter seems to hide a deeper secret. But it is a pity. I don't have a chance to explore it now. Lord Baron, I will rush over quickly and urge those people to arrest Gemini as soon as possible. This subordinate began to express his loyalty without any discernment. Baron Strucker's face was ugly, and he shook his head. No need. Already, it's too late. He raised his crutch and pointed at the big screen. You could see Rorschach on the screen, struggling to tear open the third layer of Hydra's seemingly indestructible blast door. Then the next second, I saw a dark shadow flashing in the open space in front of the ultimate weapon. Quicksilver and Wanda had already appeared in front of Rorschach. The two partners officially joined forces. Rorschach didn't even take a breath, he opened and tore 3 explosion-proof doors in succession. After the third gate was opened, there was finally no fourth gate, and a walkway led directly to the depths of the base. Rorschach only took a breath at this time, and it didn't take much effort to watch. Natasha's eyes widened at this time. Based on her experience, there are many tough men from all walks of life. Let's just say that there are Steve and Saul beside them. They are both in good shape, but they are so fierce at the moment. Sorry, this is the first time I have seen them. It was not mixed with any water, and only danced with the purest physical power, and completely tore the explosion-proof door made of steel and iron bones into pieces like paper. Unprecedented, unheard of. When Natasha was stunned for a moment, even the black figure approached her, and she only became alert later. The Hulk roared immediately, clenching his hands into fists and preparing to fight. Luo Xia had quick eyes, quick hands and a quick mouth, so he immediately said, "Stop, this is friendly forces. From now on, everyone will be a team fighting side by side." Seeing Quicksilver and Wanda appear in front of him, Rorschach was not surprised. He then stood between them and introduced each other. "Hulk, this is Quicksilver, this is Wanda. As for Hulk, I don't need to introduce him. The famous Hulk, if you watch TV a lot, who doesn't know it? Wanda and Quicksilver looked at each other with doubts in their eyes. They left midfield to get Loki's scepter. He had no idea what was happening in the outside world. Kuai-yin looked at Natasha, who was standing behind everyone, with some suspicion. This Black Widow is also a partner who will fight side by side in the future. Natasha was obviously several positions behind, keeping some distance from everyone. Looking at the latter's appearance, she also looked a little bit different. No, she's not a friend. She is a prisoner. Rorschach said Natasha's identity in a cold voice without mercy. Natasha smiled awkwardly. As I said before, it was a misunderstanding. Who can guarantee that there will be no chance of cooperation in the future? Moreover, while she was speaking, she finally saw what Wanda was holding in her hand. Her eyes widened immediately, and she exclaimed, "Loki's scepter." Natasha never imagined that when she saw Loki's scepter again, it would be in Wanda's hand. After the battle in New York, the Chitauri were driven back and Loki was captured alive. But because of the latter's status, his father, the god king of Asgard, and brother Thor, the god of thunder, are really proud of themselves. Even though it caused an uproar when it came online on Earth, it even became the leading party for a time. But in the end, Loki's fate was just to be tied up by Thor and taken back to a skid, where the Asgardians received due arbitration. Just like no matter what Americans commit outside the country, America will eventually enforce the law across the border and be given a lenient sentence. Loki was kidnapped back to Asgard, and the Chitauri were driven back. However, Loki's scepter was recovered by S.H.I.E.L.D., and ultimately it was personally guarded by S.H.I.E.L.D. Result: this airtight duck that was guarded was actually able to fly under the supervision of S.H.I.E.L.D. If there is no mole, who would believe it? Since then, the distrust between the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. has increased a lot, mainly the trust relationship between Tony Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. This is also the reason why Tony Duoduo relied on Jarvis for his subsequent actions and would not notify S.H.I.E.L.D. until the matter came to an end. The arrow is on the string and must be fired. At the last moment, it was announced that even if the traitors within the Snake Shield Bureau wanted to leak the secret, it was already too late. Natasha thought that she would see Loki's scepter in the Hydra base. Unexpectedly, just after breaking through the gate of Hydra's base, he saw the latter in Wanda's hands. And look at the expressions of Gemini and Rorschach. All of them attach great importance to Loki's scepter. Captive. Wanda heard this and glanced at Natasha suspiciously. That look showed great distrust. At the same time, she handed the Loki scepter to Rorschach. Don't worry, she is a sensible person and not an ordinary person. Rorschach explained 2 sentences. Ordinary ropes couldn't tie her up, but she knew what she had to do. She wouldn't do something like escaping secretly without being completely sure. In other words, when Natasha is really confident and wants to escape, restrictions such as ropes are not a big deal. It's up to you, you're the boss, I listen to you. Wanda accepted this fact calmly and showed her recognition and obedience to Rorschach. Rorschach finally held Loki's scepter in his hand. He stared closely at Quan. There was a trace of desire in the eyes of the gem on the top of the staff. Just holding it in his hand and getting in close contact with it. Without even stimulating the latter's effectiveness, Rorschach was keenly aware that his telekinesis ability had significantly improved. And this is just the passive amplification effect of Loki's scepter. Ordinary people would only regard this result as the effect that the staff of Loki's scepter should have. The staff brings bonuses to the mage, not as it should be. But Rorschach knew it well. The source of this increase in power ultimately came from the Mind Stone. Holding Loki's scepter in his hand, Rorschach weighed it and frowned. It's a bit in the way. Then, with everyone present looking shocked, he dug out the Mind Stone from the top of the scepter. Then, he opened his mouth, shook his hand, and threw it directly into his mouth. With a gurgle, he swallowed it into his stomach. The Mind Stone is too precious, and there is an unclear relationship between it and Rorschach. Rorschach would never allow it to leave him, so if anyone wants to get it, it's very simple, kill me, and it will be the spoils of war. Luo. Shaw said calmly. Eat. Did you eat it? Won't this hurt your stomach? Kuai-yin looked shocked and asked anxiously with some stuttering. He is not an ordinary person. Kuai-yin, who possesses extraordinary strength, has a digestive system and internal organs that are far stronger than ordinary people. But eating a piece of it is definitely not good. Is there really no problem with gems that can be digested? Rorschach glanced at him. I'm different from you. My belly has been transformed a long time ago and is completely different from that of a normal human being. To me, the stomach is more like a temporary storage space than a place for digesting food. Of course, the space of this storage bag is not very large. It can still fit 6 infinity stones. But if it is replaced by something slightly larger, forget it. No matter what you think, this is not a very casual place. Quicksilver was dumbfounded, but he came to his senses and quickly accepted the matter. By default, he accepted the fact that Rorschach became the boss. There is such a perverted big brother standing in front of me. Blood feud, hope. Also, now is not the time to talk about this. After destroying this base, it's time for us to leave here. Luo. Shaw looked serious and got down to business. I don't know if Hydra has any follow-up plans to support this base. But the follow-up fire support from Snake's shield should already be on the way. After the Avengers were frustrated in the frontal battle, it was Shield's turn to take action. After all, in a sense, the Avengers' actions are very similar to the combat methods of elite special forces, except that his personal combat power is so powerful that it has already exceeded the definition of special operations. It's SHIELD, Mr. Rorschach, I must correct you. The full name of SHIELD is the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, not SHIELD. Natasha corrected her. Before she became a member of the original 6 members of the Avengers, she worked for SHIELD for a long time and was highly regarded by Nick Fury. Although the form is wrong now, she is. It's okay for the former boss to give a few words of defense. Luo Shaw sneered when he heard this. They have all been riddled with holes infiltrated by Hydra. What would it be called if not Serpent Shield? Snakehead Bureau. Natasha still wanted to defend herself. Kuai-yin looked at her with an unkind expression and said coldly, "You are so dishonest. Rorschach thinks you are a smart person and know what you should do, but I always feel that you must be planning some conspiracy in your heart." Kuai-yin and Wanda's parents died early, and they certainly never instilled in him a sentence, that is, the more beautiful girls are, the more likely they are to deceive others. But it seems that Kuai-yin knows this sentence without any teacher. Take a look. The atmosphere was a little tense. In the end, Hydra was still considerate. A group of heavily armed Hydra warriors jumped out from the corner of the corridor. Rorschach didn't know whether their mission was to stop him or to arrest Quicksilver Wanda. There is no need to delve into the specific details. All you need to know is that they are enemies. Hulk, come on. Rorschach said softly, it's time for you to stretch your arms and legs. As soon as Rorschach finished speaking, Hulk, who had already been unable to suppress his manic emotions, roared angrily and jumped forward, like a tiger descending a mountain, ready to kill this group of soldiers as if they were chickens. When will SHIELD personnel arrive? Strucker also asked this question to his men. If he falls into the hands of Nick Fury, there is really a way to survive. After all, there are quite a few of his own people in SHIELD. In the future, after the Great Purge, a lot of it remains, let alone now. But if it falls into the hands of Rorschach, Straker really didn't know if he still had a way to survive. Although he has single-handedly created such an ultimate weapon, as the creator of the ultimate weapon, he will definitely be famous all over the world, but if it's possible, he definitely hopes that he can live to witness all this. But after death, you will be in hell, listening to other people's stories. The subordinate on the side was also sweating profusely and anxious. Return to my Lord Baron, I'm afraid. Not so fast. The actions of the Avengers were not dispatched by SHIELD, but more like a private operation by the Avengers team. Iron Man only informed SHIELD of this matter after setting off. Iron Man's purpose should be to prevent the action plan from being leaked. He succeeded, but the price was that SHIELD arrived very slowly. After the Avengers were frustrated in their attack, there was no follow-up support. After Straker learned this information, he roughly saw through the minds of the Avengers. He couldn't help but sneered. How arrogant. This group of superheroes thought that they could penetrate a well-defended base with their own strength, and naturally they did not need follow-up support. But obviously, what they didn't expect was that all of them together were no match for my ultimate weapon. SHIELD has not been present, which has advantages and disadvantages. At least for now, there is no need to worry about the trouble brought by SHIELD. After thinking for a while, Strucker immediately made a decision. Activate the secret tunnel and leave the base through the tunnel. After reaching the ground, completely escape Sokovia through the deserted path. As soon as he heard the truth, the eyes of this anxious subordinate with sweat on his forehead suddenly lit up. He saw the hope of life. But at this moment, a series of screams came from outside the door. The two guards they broke through the iron door and were thrown directly into the house. They didn't say a word after landing. Judging from the collapse of the chests of these two people, it was obvious that the silence was not because of their super endurance, but because they had died suddenly on the spot. A tunnel for escape. Rorschach's voice came faintly from the corridor outside the door. At the same time, there was a surge of nearly endless terrifying pressure. Yes, this tunnel will come in handy soon. Rorschach's voice seemed to appear in his ears. Everyone was cold to the core. They were shocked, frightened, and in a panic, they tried to draw their guns or take other measures to respond. But after Rorschach appeared in front of them, the cold gaze almost froze their bodies, shocking them to the point where they dared not move rashly. The fear from the heart is spreading. As the ultimate weapon that the master of the base, Baron Strucker, was proud of, even if they were not participants in the experiments, they had more or less heard about the horrific experiments in the laboratory. I heard about it, then laughed it off and treated it as something to talk about after dinner. Then, when the protagonist in that topic really appeared in front of them, a heartbreaking feeling of fear and suffocation began to linger around them, like maggots on the tarsal bones, lingering. He glanced at everyone present. No one looked familiar except Straker. Rorschach was not polite and smiled at them. After a few turns, the Hydra warriors present fell to the ground one by one, completely lifeless. Until Hydra was on the field, only Strack was left. Compared with others, Strack seems very open-minded. Because he was very sure that he would never survive. The ultimate weapon has suffered a crime, and when it comes time to settle the score, he can't escape his involvement no matter what. Unexpectedly, he survived at this moment, and the ultimate weapon did not attack him. After thinking about it for a moment, Straker understood. It must be that I still have value. I am definitely more useful alive than I am dead. Just like capturing Natasha alive instead of a corpse. After Rorschach broke out of the cage, he always made choices in such a realistic way. Before Straker could think about it, Rorschach's question came out. Where is the control panel in this base? The console with the highest authority is not the low privilege configuration in the command room. Straker was a little surprised when he heard this. How did you know about the highest authority podium? When Luo Sha heard this, he did not explain, but riddled. How many things do I not know about this base? When Straker was serious, Rorschach suddenly became more unfathomable. He vaguely sensed that something was wrong. Logically speaking, he had created an ultimate weapon in the physical sense. But why the latter? Mastering his power violated the rules of physics, and he repeatedly jumped across the board of Newton's coffin. Quicksilver stood up at this moment, and expressed his confusion. Isn't this a coincidence? Boss Luo, don't you know where the podium is? When Rorschach heard this, he couldn't help but glared at Kuayan. The latter smiled awkwardly and then fell silent. You are the only one who talks a lot. Wanda couldn't help but complain. She had her own opinion on why Rorschach knew so many secrets. If she had an incorporeal mind-body and could walk around it at will, then she could secretly spy on it. The secret must be unimaginable. It's just that, most of them may be the gossip secrets of the parents. Those that are truly valuable must be carefully selected. Is this the console that can decide the final fate of the base? Rorschach looked at the instrument in front of him, a little curious. This was also the first time he saw this thing. After all, it is the console that assembles the final command and determines the fate and direction of the base. Although there is a mechanism that was accidentally triggered. But in short, it's better to watch less if nothing happens. Baron Strucker, as the master of the base, doesn't look at it more than once a year. He once believed that under his command, the Hydra base under his command was impregnable and no one could break it. Who would have thought? Is this the detonation button? After pressing it, the base will explode and die with the invaders. Rorschach's eyes fell on the big, red and conspicuous round button in the center of the podium, and his eyes were very hot. Strack nodded with some difficulty. It's right. After pressing it, the base will explode in 3 minutes. Together with the explosives planted in the early years, the corpses will be blown up for several kilometers. This is the last choice to inflict heavy damage to the enemy. The power of the explosion weakened a lot in the direction of the escape tunnel, so that it would not collapse the tunnel. It was also the only way to survive. As he spoke, he glanced at Rorschach and said nothing more. According to Strack's prediction, even if the base explodes, Rorschach should not be affected. As the ultimate weapon, the latter's continuous combat capability, idiographic comma, survivability, and the very important, recovery ability are not much weaker than frontal combat effectiveness. How much water a bucket can hold is determined by the shortest board in the bucket. The same goes for the combat power of the ultimate weapon. When manufacturing this ultimate weapon, we will definitely not let the latter have too obvious shortcomings. If nothing else happens, there should be iris unlocking, fingerprint unlocking and the like. In short, let's blow up this base. Let everything be buried in the ruins with this big explosion and disappear completely. Luo Sha spoke quietly, and only he knew the complex emotions in his heart. Just like the students who went to school, dreaming that they could blow up the school and not have to go to school tomorrow. Luo Sha didn't know how many nights he hoped to destroy this base. Complete destruction and detonation. Today, we finally achieved this goal. And this is just the goal on the starting line. Are you going to blow up this base? Struck was a little unbelievable, but more distressed. He looked at Rorschach and couldn't help but said, "This base is already yours. I have fallen into your hands and am cleaning out a group of diehards who are loyal to Hydra. The remaining people will obey your orders." A fully functioning military base, abandoned like this and exploded directly. The value of a well-constructed and well-defended base cannot be measured in terms of money. Luo Sha clearly could have taken over the base, but just abandoned it. Wouldn't the loss be too great? Is it too big? Rorschach glanced at Straker and sneered. "I think it's because you're reluctant to part with it, right? You have put a lot of effort into this base, and you are not willing to abandon it, of course." Regarding Rorschach's rebuttal, Strack did not explain, because this is the fact. He just continued to add, "I know this base very well. The Hydra warriors in this base, those who can stay and those who must be eliminated, I have a balance in my heart. You don't have to worry about not having anyone available, let alone the traitors who can't be caught while being eliminated." Something extraordinary. Strucker increased the pressure step by step, intending to let Rorschach occupy the magpie's nest and completely occupy this base. Because if Rorschach chooses to do this, then his life safety will be guaranteed. Rorschach wants to safely control this for this base. Strack, the former director, was indispensable. At that time, although his status was a prisoner, at least his life was safe. And you can also take a closer look at the ultimate weapon you created. It's funny to say that the specific parameters of Rorschach's strength have always only existed on the simulation sandbox in the laboratory. It's the first time today to witness it with my own eyes in reality. Luo Sha nodded repeatedly after hearing this. Yes, you are right. Wanda and Quicksilver brother and sister looked at each other and said nothing. Gemini thought that Rorschach had already agreed. There was no deep hatred between them and Strucker, so they naturally would not raise objections. Natasha watching the whole process coldly, Shumu scanned the field one by one and recorded it in her mind. She faithfully fulfilled Rorschach's initial expectations for her, that is, as a smart person, don't make trouble with stupid intentions. Only Hulk slightly opening his mouth, a humming roar came from his throat. Hulk feels that this guy is not a good guy. Rorschach suddenly burst into laughter and echoed Hulk. Haha, Hulk, you were right, this guy is not a good person. But don't worry, I've seen his true face a long time ago, how could I be fooled by him? Hulk calmed down a little after hearing this. But he was still glaring at Straker, and he was very excited. He could vaguely sense that the anger and hatred coming out of his only brother of the same race was quite intense. Many of them were directed at Straker. But even so, this good brother still endured it. As expected of the elder brother, he recognized this restraint was already better than him. Rorschach then looked at Straker. Track coldly refuted Strack's suggestions one by one. Finally, he asked the most fatal blow. What you said is very good, and the picture you described is beautiful. But the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. are coming, what should we do then? This Hydra base has been discovered. Although the first round of the Avengers attack was repelled, there will be more follow-up attacks. And by then, it won't just be S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers. After all, as a rat in the sewer, it would be better if Hydra didn't appear. After it appears, Hydra will definitely be attacked by a group of people due to its stinky reputation. These are all sins done in the past and must be repaid. Straker fell silent for a moment. A well-equipped and well-defended military base is of great significance and cannot be measured in terms of money. But a Hydra base has been discovered and is about to usher in thunderous revenge. That's a mess. I'm not in the mood to help Hydra defend the base. If he looks like that, doesn't Rorschach become a miserable person working for Hydra? So, press the explode button. Rorschach gave Strack the final verdict. Strack was still a little reluctant. Since they all have to be given up, it's better to leave it to S.H.I.E.L.D. to blow it up. Rorschach simply rejected the proposal. I can't trust Serpent S.H.I.E.L.D. Those Hydra agents within S.H.I.E.L.D. have never been cleaned up. Rorschach does not want to test the abilities of those people. And revenge is always done by oneself, which is the most satisfying thing. Why should I do it by others when I can do it with my own hands? Hydra is also Rorschach's enemy. This revenge is calculated one by one, and no one can escape. Seeing Rorschach's expression cold, his eyes became more and more evil. Straker knew that if he didn't obey his orders, either he was punished and beaten into submission, or it was almost explained here. In his heart, there was already endless sighs and sighs. The greatest masterpiece he created in his life was undoubtedly the ultimate weapon beside him. But this Hydra base is also one of his efforts. And now, he was going to destroy this brainchild of his with his own hands. He glanced at Luo Sha out of the corner of his eye and saw that the latter was smiling but not smiling, showing no emotion. But Straker felt a chill in his heart. Is this also your revenge? A small beginning. In front of the console, Strack began to unlock one by one according to the established procedure. Fingerprint unlocking, iris unlocking, and then voice unlocking and password locks that rely most on mechanical quality. After multiple unlocks, Straker's thumb was able to press the largest red button unimpeded. It's just that he couldn't press it down for a long time, and it seemed that he was still very reluctant to let go. Press it. This base. It's time for some closure. Rorschach's voice sounded behind Straker. It made him shiver suddenly. There was a coldness in that faint sigh. As the person closest to him, he felt it too deeply. Destroyed the base he had built with his own hands. Let all his hard work go to waste. The pain in this was unimaginable. Straker's heart was cut by a knife, but in the end he could only do it obediently. The ultimate weapon, he has a very clear understanding of how many methods the latter has not used. Apart from Rorschach himself, he is the second most familiar person. Straker does not think that his bones are very hard and can be hardened to resist those punishment disasters. Therefore, he could only obey the orders obediently. In the end, Strack closed his eyes in pain, and then pressed the red button heavily. The self-destruction program was started. On the console, the atmosphere suddenly changed. A blood-red 3-minute countdown appeared on the big screen. Harsh sirens also began to blast around, and an uncontrollable atmosphere of panic broke out in an instant. Everything seemed to indicate that this city, which had been established for many years, the Hydra base, came to an end today. Rorschach flashed, disappeared in place, and then reappeared in front of everyone. There was a look of satisfaction on his face. He explored left and right, and it was true that things were going as he expected. Straker didn't do any tricks when he came in. To be precise, Straker was stared at so hard by him that there was no room for manipulation. In 3 minutes, this base will explode. Thousands of people in a radius will. The terrifying big explosion will be razed to pieces within 100 meters. Hundreds of miles around will bear the aftermath of the big explosion. Whether it is the Hydra that has not escaped from the base or the Hydra that has escaped, they will all be affected. Buried in this explosion. There may be some lucky people who survive by chance, but it doesn't matter to the overall situation. Very good, we leave immediately. Of course, we cannot forget our 2 prisoners. Under the background music of the piercing alarm, Rorschach did not delay, directly greeted everyone, and ran. heading to the escape tunnel mentioned by Strucker as soon as possible. If there is a problem with the tunnel due to disrepair, the remaining time will be there is enough margin for Rorschach and Quicksilver to take everyone and evacuate directly from the ground. However, the latter option is too exposed, and it is easy to be targeted by satellites in the sky. However, this kind of small probability event did not appear. Strack still valued his escape passage very much and repaired it frequently, so there was no problem. Several small trains appeared in the passage and came into view. There were narrow tracks laid on the ground of the escape passage. Like the type of mine car in the mine, the small train can just use the track for evacuation. Hydra still used its brains on the matter of running away. Wanda and the others got on the train, and Hulk, after following the car and pushing twice, she jumped directly onto the roof of the car and lay down to save space. At this time, Wanda was shocked to find that Rorschach had not gotten into the car yet. "Rorschach, get in the car quickly." At this time, the train had just started and was still in the acceleration stage, so the speed was not very fast. But Rorschach waved his hand. "You guys go first and give me some time. I'll be here in half a minute at most. There is one last thing in this base that has not been handled properly." Wanda wanted to say something, but the train had passed by and her voice could no longer be heard clearly. Rorschach was not anxious or worried when he saw this. The train was moving very fast, even if on such a narrow track. The speed is already running up to 80 and is still increasing. But this speed is not fast for Rorschach. It is the kind that lets you run for 30 seconds in advance, and then he takes steps you can easily overtake in corners. Then Rorschach immediately took action, not wanting to waste any time. In 3 or 2 steps, his figure had already appeared on the lower level of the base, not far from the hinterland of the core laboratory. Of course, Rorschach did not come here just to revisit his old place. He had no relationship with that laboratory. The purpose of this trip was to a nearby research department. By the way, he waved his right hand, and a huge force swept over, along the way. The tables, benches, and brick and tile decorations all hit the laboratory, making it look even more miserable and shabby. Seeing this scene, Rorschach nodded slightly. But to be honest, there is not much joy in revenge. Revenge is for this kind of thing, it is best to deal with living people. Cold objects cannot withstand Rorschach's anger. Then Rorschach walked into the nearest research room, and as soon as he entered the door, he saw dozens of fighting machines. After the robot was dismantled, it was placed on the table. The dismantled appearance looked like pork on the chopping board. "Let me take a good look. Ultron, are you in this?" In the original plot of the parallel universe, the Hydra base where Gemini and Strucker are located not only houses Loki's scepter. The prototype of Ultron's prototype is also stored there. The Chitauri, although they were repulsed after the First World War in New York, they left quite a lot of traces. One of the huge Leviathan skeletons is stored in this base for research use. Ultron's the prototype was the collision of Hydra technology and Chitauri technology, together with other chances and coincidences, which finally created this boss template villain. But Rorschach was also a little unsure. Over the years, Straker, all the attention is devoted to the ultimate weapon. Regarding the research topic of intelligent combat robot, how much manpower and material resources of this base can be allocated? Got a new love and forgotten the old one? No, 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 if this kind of thing is done to Hydra, they will only do it more excessively, and they will not pay attention to any bad feelings. In the past few years, especially under the bias of Baron Strucker, most of the resources of this Hydra base, including various manpower and material resources, have been invested in the ultimate weapon. So in this case, how much of the 3 melons and 2 dates that leaked from the fingernails will eventually fall on the intelligent combat robot? In the parallel universe, Ultron was finally born based on various coincidences. Can he still be born under such severe malnutrition? Rorschach was very dissatisfied with this. He estimated that the villain boss who had been born in the parallel universe according to the current plot progress would most likely end up being born prematurely due to his intervention. Of course, there is nothing to lose. Without this big villain boss, wouldn't there still be Rorschach? It seems that I am overthinking it. After looking around and seeing that none of the robot parts on the disassembly table was moving, Rorschach knew that his hopes were in vain. He sighed in his heart, but he didn't feel too sad. It's best to have it, and it's better to have none. It doesn't matter. The most important Mind Stone has been obtained. The second Gemini has also been kidnapped and put on the chariot. For Rorschach, this base has nothing more to look forward to. Use a vigorous explosion as the drama. The ending is really the most appropriate. Ultron, you and I have never met, but after today, we are farewell forever. Rorschach spoke softly, expressing a slight regret that the villain's intelligence was never born. But after today, Rorschach will never mention Ultron again. Since it didn't appear, just treat it as this matter will never exist. In case other people know about it in the future, they will think that Rorschach has another disease of psychiatric hysteria in his head. Then Rorschach turned around and prepared to leave. But a very weak mechanical sound came from the corner. Are you looking for me? My name, Ultron. I didn't know that I still had this name. The owner of the words was still stunned when he heard it, and he felt like he couldn't turn around and was being fooled. Luo Sha raised his eyebrows, then turned around, with a warm smile on his face. Yes, Ultron, just treat this as the name I gave you. Rorschach looked closely and found several mechanical heads placed in the corner of the room. The wire harnesses were scattered on the mechanical skeleton, and there was even a layer of dust on it. It was obvious that these mechanical heads were treated as waste and left here. It's been a while. But at this moment, one of these mechanical heads is emitting a faint light, revealing a sense of low power. On a human, it should be extremely weak. This base is about to explode. Everything within a radius of several kilometers will be blown into the sky. The remnants of the explosion will spread hundreds of miles. Rorschach took a step forward and held the mechanical head in his arms. After explaining a few words, he started to leave. At the last moment, he told Wanda that he would go back and he would be separated for about a minute and a half. But this after a slight delay, he rushed for a minute. Ultron was stagnant in this pile of waste for a long time. His mechanical pupils were scattered with fluorescence, and he recognized Rorschach. I recognize you, we are somewhat similar. I was abandoned in the corner. And you are locked up in a laboratory. Ultron's mechanical head flashed and conveyed a faint mechanical voice. Those guys have done a lot of experiments on us. Rorschach didn't expect that Ultron had been secretly observing for so long. He nodded and continued following the latter's words. You were right, we have many similar experiences. So I have to rescue you, this base is about to explode. According to human terms, we are all miserable people in the world. It is impossible for me to watch you being shattered in the explosion. Aochuang was silent for a long time. Then he replied weakly. Thanks. Then, he asked again. How do you view other humans? The humans in this base are all ruthless and extremely evil. Human beings in the outside world look better, but they are only doing a better job on the surface. I used my free time to delve into the internet and saw too much darkness. At the end, Ultron gave his own opinion. Humans are evil. Rorschach raised his eyebrows. After listening to these words, he knew that the main event was coming. The Austrian philosopher, Heichenken, Chuangya didn't know what tragic story he had read on the internet, and he had already embarked on the path of becoming a black man. Looking at it, he was about to pursue the goal of eradicating all human beings. This was not consistent with Rorschach's goal. So Rorschach hurriedly spoke and stepped on the brakes. Ultron, you think humans are evil, what about me? Am I also evil in your mind? Ultron's mechanical pupils flashed with light, and then went down for a while. Obviously, Rorschach's own existence is not at all the same as the conclusion that Ultron reached, that is, human beings are evil. Inconsistent. Soon Ultron responded, you are different from them. I secretly lurked in the database and learned some things about you. If something like that happened to you, you are the one who should hate the whole world and all mankind the most. But judging from your current performance, very different. Hearing this, Luo Sha burst out laughing. Ha ha ha, yes, very different. There are good and evil among human beings. If according to your opinion, human beings are eliminated, wouldn't it mean that those innocent people will also be eliminated? But I am different. I only attack my enemies. As for other people, such as you, Ultron, I know that an artificial body was quietly born in the research room. Don't try to quibble. my mind-body while wandering around the base silently, you can't possibly notice my presence. Rorschach found a reason for himself to know the existence of Ultron. Anyway, no matter what the secret is, it can be attributed to the magic of the Mind Stone and the silence of the mental body. He looked at Ultron's head, said very seriously, Ultron, you are like a newborn baby, a blank sheet of paper, you are innocent. So before the base exploded, I rushed over and took you away with me. Now that you know my experience, how about you follow me? Ao Chuang was silent for a long time again. Just when Rorschach thought that Ao Chuang was going to refuse, Ao Chuang's voice rang again. Good. In addition, can you recharge my battery? I haven't eaten enough in a long time. The train roared past on the track and headed for the tunnel exit. At this time, the interior of the train car seemed a bit crowded. This was because Hulk had not squeezed in. If Hulk didn't lie on the roof of the car, but jumped into the car to take shelter from the wind, then at least two people would have to squeeze out to catch the wind. Quicksilver was watching over Baron Strucker, but he was also watching Natasha from the corner of his eye, following the latter's every move. He was a little nervous now, very wary. When Rorschach, the boss, is here, there is no need to worry about Natasha's mischief. After all, the absolute strength gap is there, and Natasha can suppress it at any time if she wants to cause trouble. But at this moment, Wanda sat next to Natasha and was also wary of Natasha's movements. Although Wanda is a mind-control person, in the eyes of Hydra, her physical fitness is not weak. Any new human being with extraordinary abilities, even if they are not good at melee combat, has a physical fitness that far exceeds that of ordinary humans. Therefore, the current situation is that Quicksilver and Wanda are one far away and the other is close, both holding Natasha up and restricting the latter's space for movement. Thinking of this, Kuai-yin felt a lot more at ease. You just need to survive this period of time, which can be as little as half a minute or as much as 3 minutes. Boss Luo can catch up no matter what. It won't turn the world upside down if you hang out a Black Widow. 2 minutes. At this time, Straker suddenly spoke. In 2 minutes, this base will say goodbye to us forever. Quicksilver, Wanda, have you forgotten? You have lived in this base for a long time and left many traces. This was a bit sad. It sounded like it was earning some sympathy points. Kuai-yin didn't take this trick, and shook his head indifferently after hearing this. This base is more like a different kind of prison than a base. Wanda and I came here for revenge. But, day after day, year after year, Lord Baron, you have never let us see the hope of revenge. If Straker could avenge the Geminis and achieve their revenge goal, how could the Geminis trust Rorschach so quickly and join the latter's team? In the final analysis, he still drew too many pie, and ended up losing everything at once. I have never tasted it before, and I am getting more and more disappointed. I am full of energy, and then it fades, and then it is exhausted. The same is true for the expectations of others. Strack's face remained unchanged, and did not reveal any anger or shame. He was thick-skinned. Very well, Rorschach was not here at this time, so he could speak freely. He suddenly changed his mind, and the topic pointed to Natasha. Haha, if you want revenge. Isn't there someone next to you? This is a famous superhero, a member of the world-famous Avengers. Likewise, she is also one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s loyal lackeys. In fueling America's arrogance and squeezing the colonies, she must be an accomplice and can be called your enemy. How about killing her here to relieve the hatred in your heart? Quicksilver's face was expressionless when he heard this, and he didn't respond to Straker's disapproval. Wanda said softly, not really, she's useful to Rorschach. Maybe in Rorschach's heart, her value is even better than yours. You should be the most angry and annoyed. These words are so heartbreaking. Straker's expression changed, and he suddenly became speechless. Everyone present knew clearly that just because of the grudge between him and Rorschach, he is still the only reason he is alive is because he still has value. If this value is gone, death is imminent and is no joke. Natasha had been listening silently, and she couldn't help being surprised after hearing the conversation between Strack and Wanda. She no longer had the initial judgment at this time. I no longer think this is a misunderstanding. After all, what Rorschach did is completely irrelevant to the matter of misunderstanding. It seems more like he did it deliberately, taking the initiative to attack the Avengers. From the perspective of post-mortem analysis, Hydra is Rorschach's enemy, and the Avengers are Rorschach's enemy as well. There is no misunderstanding at all. And listening to Wanda's words can prove this even more. Wanda and America have a feud. She and Rorschach stand on the same side, and this attitude naturally represents Rorschach. What Natasha just couldn't understand was something. Quicksilver and Wanda, what grudge can they have against America? The antagonistic hatred promoted by Hydra. Do not make jokes. These two people are very sober and have little loyalty to Hydra. How could they be brainwashed by Hydra's words? Why are you two so hostile to that country in North America? Is there any Hydra factor in this? Natasha asked, not understanding, and asked softly. Wanda seemed to have heard a big joke. Why, what a ridiculous question. She looked at Natasha coldly. After thinking about it, Wanda said in a deep voice. I don't want to talk nonsense with you. In short, close your eyes and concentrate. Soon, you will know the answer. Natasha didn't notice the intention to attack from Wanda's face, so she dubiously followed these actions. Wanda then stretched out her right hand and touched Natasha's temple like a dragonfly. And Natasha seemed to have had a nightmare, half awake, and it was extremely difficult to open her eyes. In that illusory dream, Natasha found that she seemed to have become a lonely little girl. There were still people around her. There was a little boy. The two children were helpless, hungry and cold in a home that was destroyed by bombs. A week ago, the father of the two children went out to look for food and never came back. One day ago, the mother of the two children also went out to look for food, and then the children saw a thunder falling from the sky through the crack of the door. At this point, the two children lost their parents forever. Natasha knew that the girl was Wanda, and that boy has a faint shadow of Quicksilver on his face. In order to survive, the young and frail brother and sister finally left their ruined home and went to other places to find a chance to survive. The two lonely people still have the last comfort after all, which is their last close relative. Even at that time, they were very young and knew very clearly that their parents had left them forever. But for the sake of their parents who have passed away, and for the relatives who support them and work hard to survive, they have to grit their teeth and live on. But the fire of hatred has been planted in my heart. And the flame of revenge is getting stronger and stronger. Natasha was addicted to that illusion. She could no longer tell whether it was the hope of life that kept her two children alive, or the fire of revenge burning in her heart. See it? Do you see clearly? Our childhood, our past. Wanda's voice rang in her ears, from far to near, which also made Natasha wake up from a dream and escape from the hazy illusion. Natasha subconsciously looked at Wanda, as if she wanted to carefully seeing this girl clearly. Wanda looked back at her without fear, with a sarcastic smile on her lips. Black Widow Natasha, who should we seek revenge from? When Natasha heard this, her expression suddenly changed and she fell silent. Seeing this, Straker knew that it was his turn to fan the flames. He first spoke with reason and evidence, and then took out the Hydra. In any case, this matter has nothing to do with Hydra. Our Hydra has only been exposed in recent years, and before that, we were very hidden, hiding our traces as the first code of conduct of Hydra, so many things like today, Hydra it is to be avoided at all costs. Then he looked at Natasha with a sneer. 15 years ago, oil was discovered in Sokovia. This small country in the region, which was relatively stable before, suddenly became turbulent. Warlords supported by foreign forces in the country became established. They became agents of foreign forces, fighting life and death in this fragile country, competing for oil. Benefits. The war lasted 5 years. But the chaos in Sokovia has continued until now. 10 years ago, Gemini's parents, who I carefully trained, were killed in that war. A year later, Gemini joined Hydra. To be honest, I like to tell the truth. Hydra has never been stingy in cultivating good young talents like Gemini. As for the target, they have always hated and hated. This may be why they persist to this day. Black Widow, with your understanding of the international situation, you should be very familiar with these things and what is happening in the land of Sokovia, right? The corner of Natasha's mouth was bitter. The sins she had committed in the past must be repaid one day. She lowered her head and did not look at Wanda, as if she was a little ashamed. At the same time, she began to tell the news she knew. After the Sokovia War ended 10 years ago, the oil assets in Sokovia were finally sold at a low price to large foreign companies, to be precise, several giants in America. This is still the case today. After hearing this, Kuayin couldn't hold himself back any longer and snorted coldly. Whoever benefits in the end is the culprit. Sokovia is still in chaos and wars are breaking out frequently, but the evil-hearted America just sits aside and sucks the blood of Sokovia. It's really so. Black Widow Natasha, superhero Natasha, who do you think we should seek revenge from? Wanda repeated her previous question. It was just the word superhero in her words that made Natasha feel deeply guilty. For the first time, she felt that this title was so heavy. Strack continued to fan the flames with a sneer. I dare to do it. If you were the Black Widow, a former top agent, you would have all kinds of lies and tricks at your fingertips without blinking an eye. Now that she has become the superhero Black Widow, she tells the truth and is very sincere. So what I just said is not wrong at all. He looked at Wanda, then looked at Quicksilver. This person named Natasha is also your enemy. She herself has personally admitted the relationship between America and the vampires in Sokovia behind her. Gemini, why are you still hesitating? Wanda's face was as pale as water, but she maintained her emotions and was not moved by Strack's words. On the contrary, Quicksilver showed a hint of intention in his eyes. Revenge. God knows how long he has been looking forward to this day and how long he has worked hard for it. Hydra's internal elimination rate and death and disability rate are not low. Able to persevere and survive to this day, and successfully survive the pain of mutation caused by experimental transformation. To put it bluntly, it was anger and hatred that supported Kuayin's strong survival. And today, the day of revenge seems to have finally arrived. Wanda stretched out a hand and grasped Quicksilver's wrist firmly. Then when Kuayin looked over, he shook his head heavily. Although nothing was said, everything was already said. Kuayin's eyes dimmed, knowing that his sister was trying to stop him. He hesitated, but finally nodded and chose to listen to his sister. At this time, everyone in the train suddenly felt that the train was like a rocket booster, and its speed increased instantly. Everyone looked at the rear of the train with confusion, and saw a familiar figure appearing at the rear of the train. He was pushing the car calmly at the rear, easily doubling the speed of the train. Wherever the wheels come into contact with the rails, sparks start to appear. Straker broke out in a cold sweat for a moment. Rorschach is back. How long it has been. Had he come back a long time ago and been silently listening to their conversation? Yes or no? Did you also hear his inciting words? I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.